All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Wednesday, halfway through the week. Did anyone hear what the groundhog said yesterday? Did he see his shadow? Did he not see it? Is there spring? Spring is imminent. Spring is 6 weeks away. Does anyone know? It doesn't matter. This may not shock you to learn, but rodents know nothing about meteorology. So it doesn't matter what the groundhog says, but again, it's a weird custom. If you're in Vancouver, it's a beautiful sunny day out there, and the sun is just coming up on the mountains, and it's quite beautiful and enjoyable, and it's going to be a good day. At least I hope so. I'm going to give blood a little bit later today, so that should be fun, I guess. Let's see who's here. Ryan is here, so good evening to you, sir. Simrat is here. Good morning, Simrat. Blake is here. Good morning, Blake. Abby is here. Hello, Abby. And Shania is here. Hello, Shania. Actually, Shania, I think, is actually here because you're in Victoria now, I think. So I think I forgot to mention earlier this week, but welcome to Canada. I hope you're enjoying yourself. Victoria is a nice little city. It's a little sleepy for me. It's a little bit too quiet, but yeah, it's beautiful. Okie dokie. So yesterday we were talking about oppression and power, and I presented two kind of academic research articles to you, right? One here talking about a little experiment on hiring and resumes and discrimination in hiring, and the other one had to do with how people I guess how people view other people, right? And so this one here was conducted by a couple of psychologists, I think they're psychologists from the University of Chicago, and they were sending out fake resumes, right? They were responding to real job ads, but sending out fake resumes. And they created the experience and the credentials on these resumes to look correct, right? To look like the real thing. But then they put kind of fictional names at the top. And we said half of those fictional names were kind of stereotypically white sounding. And so if you heard names like, so if you heard names like Greg Baker or Emily Walsh, you would probably assume that that was a white person's name. And again, if you heard names like Jamal Jones or Lakeisha Washington, you would assume that that person was a Black American, right? And so there's kind of, not all names are like this, right? You can't tell the color of someone's skin. Good morning. You can't tell the color of someone's skin by their name necessarily, but it's easy to make assumptions, right? And I suspect there's not a lot of white women named Lakeisha Washington in the United States, right? But I would bet there are Black women named that. So again, these are kind of stereotypical names, but again, they trigger people's association, right? And so when you hear a certain name, you think, oh, this is probably a white person I'm dealing with, right? Right, so they sent out these resumes, and we I think we correctly predicted that there was some discrimination in terms of hiring, right? So the resumes with the white names at the top got called back more often, right? And sadly, I'm sad to report that actually they got more callbacks even when the resumes with the Black names had more experience and better credentials. And so, in a very sad and tragic way, it didn't matter that these people had better experience and better credentials, they still weren't preferred for the job, right? And we said that this happened across the industry. So they tried it in Chicago and Boston, and the pattern existed in both cities, and they tried it in different kinds of jobs, right? Sort of more basic minimum wage service jobs to, office managerial jobs to sort of more professional positions. They tried it in a number of different industries, and the pattern holds up regardless, which is unfortunate, but it does show us that there's discrimination in hiring, right? And it's happening, this is important too, it's happening on a systemic level, right? So we're not just looking at one company, we're not just looking at one industry, we're kind of taking a sample and saying, look, we seem to have a problem here in the US where black candidates are at a disadvantage, right? They are not favored for jobs for some reason. And I suggested to you that why that is that it has to do with racism and the history of racism in the US. And there are stereotypes and prejudices that existed in the past, hundreds of years ago, and those prejudices are still floating around in society, and people are still absorbing those messages, right? Whether they believe them or not, right? And that's the problem with social messaging. It's very hard. It's very hard to sometimes notice what they are, and it's hard to pay attention to what you're absorbing. And so I think early on when I was talking about humans as a computer and culture as our operating system, remember I was talking about that? Again, social messages are like viruses, computer viruses, and they kind of, they get downloaded into your computer. You don't know where they came from. You don't know what they're doing in the background. They could be doing anything at all, but they're still there, and they're still affecting the way your computer runs. And so social messages are like computer viruses as well. You absorb them, and you don't really know what they're doing a lot of times unless you really stop and pay attention to what you're thinking and think through why you believe what you believe. And so they take a little bit of work to uncover. And again, most of us are very busy in our lives. There's a lot of Instagram posts to look at, and so we don't really have time to examine our thoughts to that degree. And so most people don't. And so again, what's probably happening here is that those stereotypical ideas, those prejudices are serving as a lens through which people are viewing these resumes, right? And so when you flip through the resumes and there's a bunch of white names, you're looking at these resumes, you're thinking, okay, good, oh, maybe not so good. And then when you come across a black sounding name, it triggers those stereotypical prejudicial ideas. And it might even trigger them on a subconscious level. You might not even be aware that you're thinking them. But again, you're looking at that person's credentials and experience through the lens of those ideas that you have, right? And so, I don't know if this is a good comparison, but it probably happened when I put up the picture of the dog, right? Remember the dog? Of course you do. When I put up the picture of the dog, everybody looked at that dog through the lens of their own prejudicial ideas, right? So I looked at that and I was like, oh, he's such a good dog. Look at him, right? I liked him because I have positive prejudicial ideas towards dogs. I like dogs. And so when I saw that dog, I thought, oh, he's such a good boy. I just want to scratch him behind the ears, right? I had that feeling toward him. But not everyone would look at that dog and have that same feeling, right? If you have a negative prejudice towards dogs, if you've had negative experiences about dogs, if you've grown up in a place where not every dog is friendly, you're going to look at that picture and see something very different, right? You're going to be like, ooh, right? Or you're not going to have the same response that I do. And so, again, the dog thing is a little bit obvious, but what's happening here is less obvious. And it's even less obvious to people who are doing the hiring. And so most of them probably aren't trying to discriminate. Most of them are probably actively trying not to discriminate. But the fact is that sometimes we can do it without really realizing it's happening, okay? And so, again, there's 5,000 resumes went out, and this pattern holds, right? And so a lot of people are discriminating, and I suspect that there are not that many racists out there. Well, there are. There's 5,000 racists out there, absolutely. But they're not all in the hiring departments of these companies, right? So there's a few racists, but some people are probably not at all racist, but they're still discriminating by accident, right? And so, and so the problem is that there are negative stereotypes and prejudicial ideas circulating around the minoritized group, people of color in the US, but not around the dominant group, not around white people. And again, this is because the dominant group usually is seen as the default, the normal version, right? So Again, this happens with all dominant groups. It's not just race. It can be gender, it can be sexuality, it can be ability, it can be socioeconomic class. The dominant group is seen as the kind of normal, default, textbook example. And the minoritized groups are something other, something different, right? And you can see all kinds of evidence of this. I pointed out yesterday that we have Asian Americans and African Americans and Latino Americans or Latinx Americans, but white people, we don't have white Americans so much, or Caucasian Americans. Nobody identifies themselves that way. They just identify themselves as Americans. And they do that because they don't have to, right? They are assumed to be the default, right? And we have the same thing up in Canada, right? There are Asian Canadians, there's Japanese Canadians, there's, I don't know if they would say Black Canadians or African Canadian. Maybe Black Canadians. I'm not sure how people of color would kind of identify themselves in that way, but nobody calls themselves a Caucasian Canadian or a white Canadian. I've never heard anyone say that, right? Because, and I've never identified myself that way either because of white people being in the dominant group, right? We don't have to because we're assumed to be normal, right? We're assumed to be the normal version. And again, I'm not saying that that's right or correct, but I'm saying that's how it works. So again, there's prejudicial ideas that are getting in the way of hiring here, and it's causing discrimination against Black Americans. By the way, to combat this, some companies and institutions actually remove the names of people before the hiring process starts. So the people who are in charge of looking through the resumes, they don't see any names. They don't know if they're hiring a man or a woman. They can't make any assumptions about their age or their race or ethnicity or anything. All they see are credentials and work experience, and they make their decision based on that, and the person just is who they are. Yeah. So again, there's ways to fix this, and that's one way, is remove the names from resumes. But I'll also point out that the first thing is you have to actually know there's a problem, right? You have to. What's that? Well, yeah, and yeah, so that comes later, right? And so it's possible that bias can find its way in at that point, but at least you've made a step, right? You've tried to eliminate, some discrimination at this step, and it's tricky, right? Because humans aren't perfect, right? And we're certainly not perfect readers of other people. And again, in an interview, some people interview very well, some people don't, right? I personally feel that I don't interview very well because sometimes I'm a little quiet around people I don't know, and it takes me a little while to sort of get comfortable with them, and so I find it difficult to kind of be who I am in an interview, especially when I'm kind of stressed out and worried about getting the job. It's difficult for me to sort of totally be who I am, and so yeah, I don't think I interview particularly well, but some people really do. But anyway, there's some steps that we can take, right? The other one I talked about was Barack Obama, right? Is he black or white? Which seems like a ridiculous question, right? But it's actually not that ridiculous. One thing we didn't talk about yesterday is, I know we kind of all agreed that he was a black man. That's kind of how he looks. That's how he is talked about in media and in history, right? We talk about him as America's first black president. And he identifies himself that way to society, right? He's identified himself as a black man. In kind of more, I guess, genetic or biological terms, he's kind of a mixed race person, right? So his father is black, his father is from Kenya, I think, if I recall. Father is from Kenya, his mother is a white American woman. And so I think his father left when they were quite young, and his mom raised him. I think he was born in Hawaii, if I remember. So he's kind of, he's a mixed race person, technically. What's that? He's what? Islandy. He's islandy? Yeah. Probably in terms of, I think probably the the island had a bit of an effect on him, right? There's a certain kind of feel and culture there. It's beautiful, by the way, if you ever get the chance to go to Hawaii. It's so beautiful, unbelievable. It's too bad there's so many people there, but it's just like gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous. Anyway, right, so the question is, well, is he black or white? And again, a lot of people would see him as black, but this study done by Eugene Caruso here says that, well, it kind of depends, right? Because people seem to see him as having a lighter skin tone if they agree with his politics and his political approach. Good morning. If they agree with his politics and his political approach, they see him as lighter skinned. And people who don't agree with him and oppose some of his policies, they see him as having darker skin, which is weird, right? Because the man is not a chameleon, right? His skin color does not change appreciably from one day to the next. He stays pretty much a consistent color, just like most of us, right? Unless he spends a lot of time in the sun and then maybe he gets a tan, but I think he takes pretty good care of himself. He probably wears sunscreen, so yeah.
Can he be like culturally white? Because he said he was raised by a white mother. And, his dad left, so
Yeah, well, that's kind of that's a complicated question. So the question is for those who are online is the question about, how do we see Barack Obama culturally speaking? Is he sort of culturally white or is he culturally black? And of course, as you mentioned, he was raised by his white mother and probably grew up in predominantly white neighborhoods and schools and things like that. And so, and that's a complicated question. I don't know how to answer it. Sometimes there's criticism of people who seem to belong to one race, but then they grow up in a different, kind of a different environment with another one. Sometimes they get accused of, being one color on the outside and one color on the inside. And so there's a lot of kind of metaphorical slang for this, right? Like you're a Twinkie or an Oreo or something like this. An Oreo is like, dark on the outside but white on the inside. And so there's a few kind of metaphors for this as people, and it's kind of about identity as well, right? Are you one of us? And so, some people might look at Barack Obama and if they're a black American, they might say, hey, that guy's one of us, right? Barack Obama is one of our people. But other people might, look at the way he speaks or the way he acts or the fact that he was raised by a white mother, and they might say, well, he looks like one of us, but he's not really one of us. So that's a really complicated question in terms of group membership and identity and how people see others as either belonging or not belonging. That's a good question, and again, I'm not sure I have a perfect answer for you. And I think it varies. Depending on who people are. And one of the things it might have to do with is who, do they agree with Obama or not, right? I think that would, if you like his, if you like his policies and his approach, then you might want to claim him as one of your own, right? And I certainly, I kind of do this too. I'm guilty of this too, because I have a lot of respect for Barack Obama and his policies and his approach and the way he carries himself. And so I'm kind of like on the left wing liberal kind of thing, and so is he. So I kind of think of him as in my group too, even though in a number of ways he's not, right? He's black and I'm white. He's American, I'm Canadian. He's not really part of my group, but I like to pretend that he is. I think he'd like to pretend that I'm part of his group too. I think that would make him feel good. I don't know. Barack, if you're watching, call me. So it could have to do with all of those things, but I'm really not. That's a tangled knot to pull apart, you know. Good question though. Right. So again, people are actually seeing him as a different color, right? People are actually seeing him differently depending on whether they feel he's part of their group or not. And like I said, it's too late for me to take this test. I don't think I can, but I'd be curious to know which picture I would choose. Good morning. I'd be curious to see what I would, if it would work for me too, because I certainly feel I don't have any prejudice toward Black Americans. I certainly like Barack Obama. I don't know. I don't know what I would choose. But anyway, Eugene Caruso explains this. So he did the study. He did his little experiment. He got the data back, and now he's trying to explain what's happening here, right? How do I explain the pattern that I'm seeing? And he suggests two things: a positive association with whiteness and lightness. And again, I'm not saying that this is good or correct, but it's probably worth mentioning that the dominant group is the one who is in control of social messaging. They're the ones who are in control of media and other institutions. And so the dominant group is always going to portray itself in a positive light, right? And so this kind of positive association with whiteness and lightness is connected to the fact that white people are kind of the ones that are in power, and white people are the ones who are producing a lot of social messaging to begin with. Okay, so that's kind of where that comes from. And the second one, again, is the tendency to view people of the same group more favorably than those of another group. Okay, and so that's that Tajfel's social identity theory. We want to, people who are in our group, we look at them more favorably. We think they're better, right? And so you could think of any group you want, right? So you might come to Canada and you might be from Iran, and you might look at other people from Iran more favorably than people from other countries, because you're like, hey, they're one of my people, right? They're one of, maybe or maybe not, right? But you might be inclined to think that, right? You're like, oh, they're one of mine, right? And certainly I've felt this being in foreign countries and bumping into other Canadians there. Even if I don't know them, of course, but I'm like, yeah, it's from Canada. And so, the person could be a total jerk, but I'm inclined to think of them better because they're, good morning, because they're one of mine, right? They're one of ours. Okay, the next thing we wanted to talk about is the idea of privilege. And privilege can be a little tricky to understand and think about, okay? Because it's, in many cases, it is invisible. It's okay. It's tricky to get out. Is it almost empty? Or is it just...
super dry.
Oh, it's super dry?
Literally impossible to get it out.
Okay. If you want a better one, maybe just pop into another classroom and grab some if you want. Actually, if you want to bring the whole thing back, and then I'll just get Ellie to change that. Yeah. So just see if there's one in a classroom next door that nobody's in. Right, so privilege. Privilege is a tricky thing to understand. Mostly it's invisible, okay? In many cases it's invisible, so it's hard to kind of see. It's hard to know when it's affecting you and when it's not. And some people, because of that, some people deny that it even exists, okay? So it's a tricky thing to talk about. It's kind of slippery. Sometimes it makes people feel defensive and upset. It's difficult to know when it exists and when it's happening. It's kind of this mysterious, invisible thing. And so it's a tricky one, but we're going to figure it out and we're going to get through it. So to do this, again, I mentioned yesterday I would like to read this article called White Privilege, Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack. Do you know what a knapsack is? It's kind of an old slang. Anyone know? No? A knapsack is just like a backpack. That's what it is. People called them knapsacks like 40 years ago. So it's an older kind of slang. It's an older term, but it's a backpack, the invisible backpack. Again, I don't think it's a great metaphor, but maybe we can sort of work through this and figure out a better way to see it. But anyway, the article itself is very popular in kind of social justice circles. Lots of people have read it, and so we should read it too. Just as a quick background, Peggy McIntosh, the woman who wrote it, she was doing women's studies. So she was kind of interested in gender inequality, sort of between men and women. And so that was her kind of area of study. But in the process of doing all of that work on gender, she started thinking about her race and the sort of the experience of being a white person in society. So she kind of took what she was learning in her gender studies and started to think about it in terms of race. And so that's kind of what this article is about. So you'll hear a little bit about men and women and gender because that's Peggy's thing. That's what she's really doing. But in the article, she's thinking about what she knows about gender, but she's thinking about her own experience with race and being a white woman in a society that is controlled by white people. Okay, so we'll read the article, and I've got a few questions for you, and the questions are these. Number one, what does it mean to have privilege? What is this privilege thing, right? What does it mean? There should be a question mark there at the end of the sentence in question 2, but how does privilege benefit those in the dominant group? How does it benefit those in the dominant group? And then how does it negatively affect those in the minoritized group? Okay, so how does it benefit one group and disadvantage the other one? Are those people that have privilege, are they doing something wrong? Should they be scolded, right? Can privilege be a good thing? And last one is, can you think of a specific way in which you are privileged? Can you think of a way in which you have privilege or in which you've experienced a situation where your privilege or your lack of privilege kind of affected that situation? Okay, that might be a little bit of a tricky one, but it also might not be. So I'll give you some time to read it. Of course, the article is in Microsoft Teams, and so I'll give you some time to read, and then we'll answer some questions, okay? So maybe I'll put 15 minutes on the clock here and see where that takes us, okay? Okay, good people. I know we've been working hard for a little bit here, so why don't we take a quick break? We'll come back and then we'll try to pull this article apart and see what we can learn from it, okay? So take 10 and we'll come back and deal with it, okay? Okay, and we are back. So, again, this is kind of an interesting article. It's probably in places a little bit difficult to read because it's written by an academic, kind of for academics, so it's a little tricky, but I think some of this stuff is easy enough to understand, and so we can sort it out. So, first question I have for you is what is privilege? What is it? In this case, it certainly is, right? So this is about white privilege, so it is about race, but you can have all kinds of privilege, right? Depending on the dominant group you belong to. You can have male privilege, you can have heterosexual privilege, you can have different types depending on the social groups you belong to. Cheyenne?
Yeah, I was exactly going to say something like that. Like you can express it in some different ways. Like you can be dominant in a social group in power. You can be dominant in socials. You can be dominant in financial things. You can be like have more power in like I don't know educational system.
Yeah. So there's kind of different. You can be the member of a dominant and a minoritized group at the same time, right? White women are a perfect example of this. They're in the dominant group here in North America in terms of race, but actually they're in a minoritized group in terms of gender. So you can be, this is where it gets complicated because you can be kind of in multiple places at multiple times. You're not always, 100% kind of in power, quote unquote. Give me more though, there's more to this. Right. So it kind of describes a general societal condition in which some people have advantages, right, and other people are disadvantaged, and that kind of thing is privilege, right? The advantages you have are what privilege is, and so maybe what are some examples of privilege that Peggy mentions here? What does she mention? Okay, give me more.
There's something I didn't understand.
Mm-hmm.
She said she can move to any neighborhood and like rent that place. I mean, anyone who can afford it can rent it. I don't get how that's a privilege.
Right. So there's a little bit of, that's a little bit of a tricky one. Kind of if you reduce that statement to the lowest common denominator, and so the statement here is that she can move to any neighborhood she wants and be confident that she could rent a place there. Was that the statement? Something like that. Okay. So and Mulder's response is that, well, yeah, I mean, if you have the money, you can rent anywhere, and yeah, that is true, but when you strip this one down, and lots of the points can be stripped down to this, the idea is that people won't discriminate against me based on race. That's what it is. And so, yes, technically or will they choose someone of the dominant race and not you for that reason? Just give me 1 second, I'll continue in a second. I'm just gonna close some stuff here because I think my computer is really slow because I've got 100 different programs open and it is making it difficult for my computer to keep up. Okay, hopefully that's better. Right, so the idea, so we've demonstrated that discrimination happens in hiring. Right? We've kind of seen that. And again, that study that we talked about is not the only one. There's a bunch of them that show that. So do you think there's discrimination in apartment rentals too? Yeah. So the idea behind that one is the idea that, if I have the money to rent somewhere and I submit an application, I don't have to worry that the landlord is going to say no because I'm black or because I'm South Asian or whatever. Right? And I certainly don't. When I submit an application to rent a place, I never worry that they're going to say no because I'm white. right? I never have to worry about that. And again, if you're a person of color, you might not have to worry about it either, because people might not discriminate against you, but they also might. And so I think that's kind of the idea behind that, Mulder, is that, and it's actually the idea behind a lot of the points that she makes. If you strip away some of the detail, if you reduce it to its lowest common denominator, just like in math, the idea is that if I do something, I don't have to worry that my race is going to count against me. I don't have to worry that people are going to discriminate against me in hiring, in finding an apartment building. If I move in next door, I can be pretty sure that my neighbors will either be nice to me or they'll just kind of be neutral. I don't have to worry that they actively won't like me because I'm black or South Asian or Middle Eastern or gay or whatever, right? I don't have to worry about that. So a lot of those points are actually like that if you just reduce it down to what she's really talking about. What other ways can you have privilege? Like some of those points. What are some other ways in which, I think maybe I'm kind of moving into question 2 here, so maybe I'll just rephrase it based on what I said here. How does privilege benefit people in the dominant group? What benefits do dominant group people get? What's that? People's rights? Yeah, I guess I have most of, or not I shouldn't say I, but people in the dominant group are generally not denied any of their rights or freedoms, right? They are generally given that. What else? In part, okay, so that's part of this. Again, there's a few themes to, she had that list of, 30 different things. One of the themes is one of the things we talked about, is that if you're in a situation, if you have privilege, you don't have to worry that your social group is counting against you, right? And so again, if I go to apply for a job and I don't get that job, I don't have to worry about, I wonder if they didn't hire me because I was white. I don't have to worry about that. Or I wonder if they didn't hire me because I was straight. Or I wonder if they didn't hire me because I was a man. Right? That's not a thing that people in the dominant group have to worry about. But people in minoritized groups sometimes do. They might have to think to themselves, did I not get that job because I'm Indian? Did I not get that job because I'm a woman? Did I not get that job because I'm a gay man, right? There's always that kind of question lurking in the back, right? Was I discriminated against? Did they say no to me because of the social group I belong to, right? Whereas people in the dominant group generally don't have to worry about that because generally they're not being discriminated against, right? So again, a lot of those are like that. I don't have to worry about my social group influencing the way that people think about me. Does that make a little bit of sense? In part it is, right? But in some cases it's about things that you might have to do. What do people in minoritized groups, what do they have to do that dominant group members don't? In some cases, that's probably true, right? They might have negative stereotypes and prejudices that they may feel they need to overcome, right? So there might be ideas about what their race or gender or sexuality is like, and they may feel the need to to prove that wrong, right? That's definitely possible. What else? What else do they have to do?
They have to be conscious of the discrimination that's happening around them.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, that's actually a really good one, Nicholas. Part of privilege is that if you are in the dominant group, you can ignore the oppression around you, right? So let's use an example of me, for example. I'm in the dominant group in Canada. I'm a white person. Do I have to worry about racism? Is it directed at me? No, right? I'm not on the receiving end of racism in Canada. So can I safely ignore it? Yeah, right? I shouldn't. I should not ignore it, right? It's socially responsible of me not to ignore it. But I can because it's not focused at me, right? I can just say, oh, well, whatever, I don't care. I'm going to move on with my life. And I get to do that because it's not aimed at me, right? But if I'm, say, a Muslim woman, can I ignore racism? I could try to, but I'm going to experience it firsthand, right? It's going to be directed at me. And so, and again, I'm mixing things up a little bit here because being Muslim is not a race, it's obviously a religion, so I'm kind of combining things in an awkward way, which I shouldn't do. But my point here is that minoritized groups have a harder time ignoring discrimination because it's happening to them, right? Then you have to pay attention to it because you can't ignore it. But people who aren't being discriminated against, they get to ignore it if they choose, right? They shouldn't, but they're allowed to, right? They can be blind to it. But when it's happening to you, it's much harder to be blind to it. What else does it mean to have privilege? This is an example I thought of a while ago, and it's an imperfect example, but maybe it'll help. When I was, how old was I? 13 or 14. I went to a junior high school in Edmonton, and kind of across the street from the junior high school was a 7-Eleven, like a convenience store. And there was really nowhere to go at lunch. Like there was just houses all around. All there was is this 7-Eleven. So lots of kids would go to the 7-Eleven. They would buy, chips or, a candy bar, or maybe get one of those chili dogs, which you really shouldn't eat from 7-Eleven. That's gross. But anyway, 13 years old, so we would eat them. And when I went into a convenience store like that as a 13-year-old, the cashier, the person working at the store watched me like a hawk, right? I'd be walking down the aisles looking for what I was going to buy as a snack, and they were watching me the whole time. Why were they watching me the whole time? They don't have trust. What do they think I'm going to do? They think I'm going to steal something, right? Why? Because I'm a teenager, and that's what teenagers do. They steal stuff. No, they don't, but I didn't. I never stole anything, but they watched me like a hawk, right? Now, if I walk into a convenience store looking for a snack, do you think anyone pays attention to me? Nope. Nobody looks at me at all. I probably could steal stuff very easily and nobody would notice, right? So there's a bit of age privilege, if you will, there, right? My age privilege is that I get to walk into a store and nobody watches me and thinks I'm going to steal, right? But as a 13-year-old, I didn't have that privilege, right? There was the stereotype or the prejudice that, oh, teenagers, they'll steal stuff from your store. You know how teenagers are. And so I got watched the whole time. Do you think I could feel that? Do you think I knew that they were watching me? Yeah, I can feel their eyes like burning a hole in my head, right? I didn't even have to watch them. I could feel them watching me. And so that's a good example of privilege, is that I get to walk into a store now. Nobody pays any attention to me. I don't feel that scrutiny on me, right? But as a teenager, I definitely did, right? And so, again, there's a little element. I didn't have privilege, right? There was, it would be nice if I was able to walk into that store and people didn't scrutinize me in that very uncomfortable way, but they did, right? What other ways are people advantaged or disadvantaged as a minoritized group? Either one.
By people, you mean white people or just
Any group you want to?
Divorcing woman,
Hmm?
sometimes even if the mom is abusive, the judge will still give them because it's guardianship of the child.
Yeah, that's a tricky one, right? I don't know what to do with that. The comment for online people, the comment was, what about situations where you have a husband and wife who are divorcing and the home is really chaotic and destructive, and it goes to court and the judge is trying to figure out if the kids should stay with the dad or the mom. And often the kids are placed with the mother, even if she's struggling with alcohol or drug addiction. Things have to be really bad sometimes for the court to place children with their father, even if their father is kind of, doing better at his life than the mother is. So that is true. I don't know how to fit that into what we're talking about. I think there is a stereotype that mothers are more caring and nurturing, and the kids are better. They get more love and caring from their mother than their father. I don't think that's necessarily true, but I think that's a stereotype that we often hold. And I don't know how to explain that dynamic. I think the dynamic is correct. I think it does happen more often that children are placed with their mother rather than their father. But I don't know how to fit it into this particular. I don't know if it's I don't know if it's a real function of privilege, or if it is an evidence of sort of societal norms or societal beliefs about what parental dynamics are. That's a tricky one. And I don't, as I say, it's possible that it slots in here somewhere, but I don't know how to make it fit in. So you're asking really good questions today that I have no answer for, but but I like it. That's a good one. What about let's think about sexuality. So if you're a gay person or if you are a lesbian person, what kind of things can you maybe not do that straight people can do?
Love the opposing gender.
Yeah, you can. Well, yeah, you can. If you're a straight person, like I am, you don't have to tell me your sexuality, obviously, but I'll put it out there. I'm a straight person, so I can date whomever I want, right? And nobody's going to say anything. I can walk down the street with my girlfriend and hold her hand and give her a little kiss and things like that, as long as it's not too much. But I can do that kind of stuff. And does anyone look at me weird? No. Most people are like, oh, look at those guys. They're so cute, which they do because we are cute. But what? We are. We are. So, but nobody looks twice, right? But if I was a gay man and I was walking down the street with my boyfriend and I gave him a little kiss, would everybody be okay with that? No, right?
Everyone's gonna look at you like, what are you doing?
Well, in Canada, not everyone will. Most people are pretty cool with it. Most people won't look twice, right? But some people will, right? And I might feel a little less comfortable doing that, right? I might not feel comfortable holding my boyfriend's hand in public because I know how other people will look at me. And when they're looking at me, I'm going to feel judged. I'm going to feel bad, right? I'm going to feel their eyes on me, just like that clerk in the 7-Eleven who was looking at me when I was 13, and I could feel him looking at me, right? I'm going to feel those people looking at me in public, and I'm not going to like that feeling. So maybe I don't feel comfortable holding my boyfriend's hand in public, right? Whereas as a straight person, I can hold my girlfriend's hand all day long, and nobody will say anything. Nobody will look. Nobody will look at that. Oh, that's horrible. Nobody's going to do any of that stuff, right? So that's kind of a privilege I have as a straight person in society, right? I can walk around with my significant other. I can walk around with my partner, and nobody looks, nobody stares, nobody says anything, nobody makes any inappropriate or hurtful comments. Where again, if I was a gay man walking around with my boyfriend, I might expect some of that. I might expect some looks, maybe some people, might say some inappropriate things. Again, in Canada, we're pretty relaxed and tolerant on that at this point, so it would probably be mostly okay for me. It would be probably mostly safe, but not 100%, right? Where as a straight man, nobody looks twice, right? I can walk around with my girlfriend all day long, nobody says anything, right? So that's kind of a privilege that's privilege, right? I am able to do that. Gay and lesbian people, more difficult, right? They don't have that same privilege that I do.
Well, it depends on the place. In gay street, you can kiss your boyfriend.
In where?
In gay street.
Yeah, so there's definitely, and there's definitely a difference in terms of, where you are in a given city, for instance, right? Like if you're down on Davie Street, definitely nobody will look twice because there's a pretty big gay community that's centered around Davie Street downtown. There is. But also country-wise, right? So again, Canada on the whole is pretty tolerant of homosexuality. Most people are fine with it, and the people who aren't fine with it generally don't say anything about it. So it's kind of, it's not something we're really, concerned about at the moment, right? But again, other countries are not the same, right? And again, some places walking down the street with your boyfriend, you might get inappropriate remarks or angry remarks. In some places you might get more than that. In some places you might get arrested or worse, right? So yeah, it very much depends on where you are, both within a city but also in the world, right? Different societies have different ideas about what is appropriate, right? And what is normal and what is not normal, right? What's that?
I was thinking of why a gay person can't be the president. It's kind of bizarre.
Why can a gay person be president? Or why can they not?
They cannot.
Why can they not? Well, this is the thing, right? On paper, there's absolutely no reason why a gay person could not be president. And in fact, on paper, it says that you can't discriminate, right? There are laws saying you cannot discriminate against people based on their sexuality, right? But as we've found out from some of those other studies, people do discriminate anyway, right? Discrimination still happens, even though technically it's not legal, but it still happens. And so, there's no reason why a gay person couldn't be president, but on the other hand, there are reasons why a gay person isn't president, right? And it has to do with stereotypes and prejudice and people actively discriminating against them. So,
Kind of taboo.
what's that?
It's still kind of taboo.
A little bit, right? And again, there's that idea of filters, right? So who do we imagine? I know we're just about out of time here, but this is the last thing we'll say. We talked about this with Hillary Clinton, right? Who do we imagine as president of the United States? We imagine a man, usually an older man, and we kind of have an idea of what we'd like our leaders to be, right? Strong, tough, determined, emotions under control, good in a crisis. That's our guy, right? That's our leader. But what are some of our stereotypes about gay men, for instance? The opposite thing, right? Think of Damien from Mean Girls, right? He was kind of frivolous and flighty, and he was not serious all the time, and he was a bit superficial and obsessed with like hair and hand creams and stuff like that. That doesn't mesh very well with our idea of what a president should be, right? And so people, whether they're consciously thinking about it or not, what they're doing on a subconscious level is they're like, I know who the president's supposed to be. And then I think of a gay person and I'm like, no, those two ideas don't fit, right? Like you said, it's like the opposite end of what people imagine to be the president. And so Is there a reason why a gay person, a gay man, for instance, couldn't be president? No, there's nothing stopping them. But in another way, there is something stopping them, right? People's stereotypes and prejudicial ideas that they have about gay people and about gay men. That is stopping them. Okay, that is all the time we have. That was a good question. A couple of good questions there. That was good. Come back tomorrow. We'll finish this privilege thing, and then I think we'll get on to our first mode of oppression, ableism. So that is all for today. Thank you. Goodbye and good luck.